we have two speakers going to give a virtual talk, and those next speakers are Chris Rexroth and Addie Cobb. So, Chris is a biomedical engineer who looks forward to a world where corporate interests do not interfere with medical advancements. He currently works with an implantable device that is being studied under clinical trials in people with spinal cord injury. With Cosmic, he is preparing the documentation of that device so that other researchers developing human therapies can use it themselves. Addie is the head of the OSPO for Vero Life Sciences, an organization founded to develop technologies that prevent the transmission of diseases. She's an open source advocate and a community management expert with over 20 years of expertise and experience leading transformative initiatives across the globe. She has worked with companies such as IOHK, Tetra Technologies, Elanco, and Analog Devices. Their talk is entitled Opportunities for Open Healthware Community Mobilization Informed by Experiences of High-Risk Classification Devices.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Rexroth with Cosmic.
And I am Addie Cobb with Varo Life Sciences.
We are collabing today to give a presentation on steps forward for community mobilization in the open healthcare community. So our presentation is coming in the wake of the open healthware workshops, where we've seen some opportunities for our community to come together and build some shared resources. So in our presentation, we'll be introducing our individual projects, and then some problems and lessons learned in the regulatory space and other problem spaces. Then we'll be talking through what next steps exist and what available resources could contribute to those. I am personally a member of OSHWA and representing Cosmic, the Open Source Implantable Device Initiative. Cosmic's main goal is to increase access to human-ready therapies. We work with researchers in the field of neuromodulation, which is using electricity inside of the body to either restore physical function or diminish unwanted symptoms. So what that can look like is a cochlear implant, which helps somebody hear again, or reducing pain signals to help somebody live a more comfortable life. We believe that we can help these therapies get to market sooner by making it easier to develop the technology. So a researcher working in this space who wants to develop implantable technology is going to run into decades of development and millions of dollars of costs to develop their own design. If they want to use an existing device, say by Medtronic or Boston Scientific, that device is going to have very fixed specifications for its original use, and it's going to be hard to customize towards their new research application. There's also a very expansive regulatory and quality expertise that is needed to get a device not just to the research stage, but to market. And researchers are running into intellectual property complications. They want to know that the system they're using is going to be available to them for as long as. So instead of using one of these systems in some limited way, or designing a new one, why recreate the wheel? There's already the Cosmic system, our implantable device, which is already being used in 10 humans for a clinical study. It has a modular design, so there are different aspects of the technology that can stimulate and record nerves. And by putting out the open source design, we've now made it customizable. So the major value that comes from making this technology open source is an alternative for access. A researcher or startup using this device has the freedom to commercialize whatever findings they make with it or any alterations they make to the device. They have open access to the design and documentations. We're adding in resources that they need to be able to get this through the FDA. And most importantly, it is already being used in humans and already been through the FDA through an investigational device exemption or an IDE. So I'll be using that today. Thank you. Now on to Addie.
So I represent Varl Life Sciences, and we are a proud member of OSHA, the Open Source Hardware Association. Our organization is really passionate about preventing the transmission of infectious diseases, airborne pathogens, and we believe that in order to prevent the transmission of these pathogens, you have to be able to detect first what's in your environment. And so it starts with diagnostics and understanding what you're exposed to. I know we all had the experience of living through COVID, which was a really big awakening for individuals across the globe, realizing our exposure to our environment and the air around us. Today, we're sitting in an auditorium, we're sitting in our rooms, and we are not aware of and don't have the knowledge of what's around us. As you can see from this slide, there is a rapid escalation in pandemics and epidemics across the globe. And this is certainly not a comprehensive list, but it gives a perspective about what we are currently exposed to and experiencing as a society. And it doesn't just stop with pandemics and epidemics. It also goes on to allergens and to molds and to funguses. And so there's a lot of different airborne pathogens. And so when we think about diagnostics and the detection of airborne pathogens, we need to look at kind of what the current scenario is. And so we can all think back to the periods of COVID when we got to experience a nasal swab, which was exceedingly painful and very invasive. It wasn't a comfortable test. And then, of course, you have a slow readout time. So right now, current testing shows a minimum of 15 minutes for you to understand what the result is. And that 15 minutes could be the difference between an individual being exposed and many, many, many individuals being exposed. Another component of current diagnostic landscape is that it's expensive. Depending upon the type of pathogen you're testing for and the diagnostic equipment that's available to you, some of the costs can be upwards of hundreds of dollars. And lastly, the adaptability to new pathogens. There's limited options for testing of viruses, bacteria, fungi, allergens, and molds. We just don't know. And when we have a new emerging pathogen, we just don't know. We don't have the capacity to rapidly develop tests that support understanding and detecting what's in our environment, specifically our indoor air quality environment, right? Providing that quality of air that we're all breathing in shared spaces. Varro's platform technology and current product suite houses 3 products. We have a biosensor that is modular and customizable to different pathogens. So you can test and screen for different either singular or multiple pathogens with our biosensor, our MIE. So the next thing is our breath-based diagnostic, which allows you with a simple exhale in 60 seconds to know and have a diagnostic result for what you've been exposed to. This is a vast improvement on the current 15-minute wait time for a readout. And then lastly, we have the air biodetector, which is a continuously monitoring indoor air environment tool. So it will give people in shared spaces the capacity to know what is in their breathing space, as well as with that knowledge, you get to decide and make proactive decisions for your safety and the safety of the people around you. And in fact, making preventative measures more possible for everyone to live a healthier life. Our technologies and our commitment to open source are so that individuals across the globe can be more proactive and be more informed about what we all breathe in every day. And so we can take healthy steps to know our surroundings, to know what we can do, and to take the next step to take care of our safety as well as those around us. And we are open sourcing this so that people can innovate on this and develop other tools that help them understand the air supply that they have been exposed to. and what that means for their health and their family's health and their community's health. Chris and I had the opportunity to attend multiple open healthware workshops recently. And in our dialogue about this opportunity and what that means to our individual organizations, as well as us together as we look at developing that ecosystem, we wanted to bring forward a couple of pieces of information. So I'll turn it over to you, Chris, to talk through the next stage.
So, what does it mean to be a project in this open healthware space? That's certainly something we've been trying to figure out with Cosmic. So, what is the full source to a medical device, and how can we make it easier for someone to adopt our design? So, that looks like including into the full source beyond just the circuit board, the software, firmware, to include manufacturing information. How is this going to be built? Because that is important to the FDA. What does the biocompatibility data look like? Is it going to be safe interacting with tissue? How is it being sterilized? As well as how can we make it easier for researchers to adopt this and get it through the FDA so that they can use it in humans as well? So our goal, as you can kind of pick out, is to help other people get their own investigational device exemption approval, their own IDE approval, based on our existing technology. We at Cosmic have already filed certain questions to the FDA about an open source medical device. Here are some of the takeaways from their responses, which you can also see on our website. So there's this concept called right of reference, which allows a new submitter to the FDA to reference an existing piece of data or design that the FDA holds from another submission. So we, as the holder of the design of the cosmic system, want everyone to be able to reference our design for their submissions. We submitted this idea of a blanket right of reference, which would allow anyone to reference our data freely. And the FDA decided that there needs to be a bit more supervision and a more personal stake in that transaction from an organization. So that is one opportunity for our community to come together and create some type of standard way of action in that process. Um, Another response from the FDA let us know that a new user of the device should be able to inform their risk analysis with what has gone wrong with the device in the past. This is called a device-related adverse event. And there are existing databases for commercial devices that hold this type of information. We asked the FDA if we could use that database, and they said no. One success, though, that we have had is our first new IDE being approved to use the cosmic system for something new. So currently it is being used in people with spinal cord injury for hand function, and now there will be a study for restoring walking in people with spinal cord injury. So these responses highlight some opportunities that our community could work together on. First, I think there's an opportunity to create guidelines for sharing extra stores. So the workshops have defined quite a bit of what is in that full source. I would also propose that pre-submissions and openly sharing them is almost an obligation for us in the open healthware community, because that allows us to, in one way, hold the FDA accountable with their responses, but also know the trends in the FDA responses that are coming back to our open healthware projects. There's an opportunity for making it more efficient process for right of reference and master file. There's opportunity for us to create a shared database that exists below the commercial level of device-related adverse events. And these are things that could really help adoption of open source medical devices at the FDA investigational device level. Another thing I'd like to mention is that at the FDA, they want to make sure first and foremost that they are getting quality submissions that waste their time. So in the open healthcare community, we have a mandate to make sure we are doing our best to use all of the full source to put in our most quality submission. So just because there is a precedent like the Cosmic system, a new user of this system should not just copy and paste information, but should make a well-informed submission, and that can help create legitimacy around our open projects.
So another thing that we talked about was the problem space. So specifically open source adoption in the healthcare industry, which is, as we all know, a very proprietary industry. There's been limited open source adoption. And so in looking at that, we talk through how do you support an ecosystem and what considerations or things need to be addressed in order to make that ecosystem flourish. One of the highlighted opportunities is building understanding around the open source business model. So many practitioners and business leaders need to have an understanding about what will support their business, how open source supports their business, and how to form a business model around the open source principles. Another item that we talked about was compliance with the open source definition. So a lot of medical research is a long-term investment, right? So within the United States, for example, some of that research starts in academia and is federally funded. Well, if you receive federal funds, you fall under the Bayh-Dole Act, and certain components within the Bayh-Dole Act are prohibitive of actually meeting the open source definition. And so as an industry and as practitioners in the healthcare field who are trying to drive open source adoption, it's really important that we find a way to legitimize our practice in being open. Because while we may not meet an open source standard, we are driving towards openness, which is the ultimate goal. And really kind of finding a way to illuminate and highlight that working and help others come to that same appreciation. Another piece that we discussed was as an industry, the healthcare world is not very for failures, which is not really surprising because nobody really wants to see healthcare failures. And so trying to form spaces that are dedicated for research use only, or RUO, so that people can find ways to make adaptations or innovate on technology that exists currently for global applications and for individuals who may not have had the capacity or the ability to look at devices or start something from a fresh place, right? If you have an open space with RUO devices, you have the capacity to innovate and build adaptations that might serve a new population or a populace that is currently underserved, democratizing the opportunity for and access to healthcare more broadly. Looking at some of the struggles that the healthcare industry has, we found and talked about a couple of steps that would be helpful. So one, understanding the current regulatory and policy landscape for open source adoption is going to be really critical, and building a knowledge base around best practices for future adopters, right? Because the regulatory and policy demand is very extensive for people who operate in this industry. The next thing that we think would be helpful is advocacy for some reform around policy and regulations, simply because there needs to be some alignment as well as understanding around what the open source practitioners in the medical field do and how it brings value to the field as a whole. Lastly, and I touched on it just a minute ago, we feel that driving open source understanding and promoting the virtues of open source is going to be really key for medical device stakeholders broadly. As a predominantly proprietary industry, there's not a lot of understanding about what the values and practices are from an open source capacity. And so that necessitates that kind of support. I am going to turn it over to Chris to talk about some resources that we have collected.
So where do we look towards to understand the current state of OS adoption? And where do we look towards to move forward, to move towards advocacy and policy change? So we started a list, Addie and I, of different community connections and guides that are out there in the open source world. Addie's talked about inner source as being a great way to introduce non-open projects towards the concepts of open source development. There are obviously everyone in the room today for the Hope Open Healthware community that can be an active participant in this, but this is really about starting the conversation on how these different groups can work together to create new resources relevant to open healthware. So I would say uh, thank you. We hope that this spurs conversations to push towards the next step of the open healthware community. For Cosmic, you can connect with us through the QR code in the link tree or my email. And I look forward to talking to you all.